A friend of yours, Syl?
The Admiral spoke up.
Penelope, please, and yes, Gareth, first officer of the Nebula.
The Admiral extended his hand and gave that curt nod Gareth was familiar with.
A pleasure.
Gareth took the offered hand and shook it as was the custom.
I can assume you're here as a representative of Terran trade efforts.
Well, technically he
The man gestured towards the other human across the room.
is the one representing us. I'm just babysitting. A glorified valet more than not.
My condolences. Federation space is fairly safe. Did your higher-ups really think military protection necessary?
I raised the very same point, but was soundly ignored. I suppose the lack of trust in space that is unknown and inhabited by unknown species played a part. I also must admit, there was a fair bit of our own space travelled through that was risky enough to warrant it.
Gareth held his tongue but couldn't help but think that there might be less mistrust if they'd simply be more open with the Federation. His words were more measured.
Perhaps in time, yes?
The man nodded and then looked to Pen as if she was going to strike up a conversation. She gave an awkward look before speaking.
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to speak to my friend here in private.
Oh, of course. We can speak more later.
Sure. Till then.
She brought 2 fingers up for a lazy nod and salute, which he acknowledged with a nod of his own. He gave another nod to Gareth before he turned and made his way back to his companion.
So, a fiancé? You didn't let that bit slip when we were trekking through the wilderness?
Gareth sighed.
Yes, yes. I was to be the 7th husband of the heir to the 3rd most influential trading company off Willia.
Gareth turned and walked the conversation towards a table that would suit them. Pen almost stopped in her tracks halfway there.
Whoa, 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 7th? You sure she's not like, getting a hold of the will and then...
Penelope pulled a thumb across her neck. Gareth understood her meaning and couldn't help but laugh a bit.
No, I'm fairly sure she isn't, though she can be quite ruthless in many ways. In fact, I know all of them. 8 now are still alive.
So she just can't make up her mind then?
I think you misunderstand. They're all her husbands.
Pen looked even more stricken than she did just before. She sat down as if to steady herself.
Fairly certain I mentioned the ratio of males to females, did I not? 1 to 4 or 5.
He said as he sat next to her.
You did. I suppose I didn't really think about that 8, though.
Indeed, my mother took 5 over her life, but never more than 3 at a single time. Of course, that's the traditional family cell, as they say. That only makes up 3/4 of the total.
What does Whelan courtship look like then? If you were to be bonded but never went through with it, is there a ceremony?
Yes, not unlike your marriage ceremony, but a fair bit wetter, I'd guess. It tends to be done in a shallows under the sun, so that the lumen might light your way or whatever. Before that, there is a general courtship between the two if it's the woman's first bondmate. If she's already taken one or more, it's not uncommon for it to be more of a group affair to make sure everyone is compatible.
So you met her other...
A few, yes.
So you guys meet in a park and she thought you were cute. Hit it off, tragedy struck when she learns you chose to join on with the Nebula?
Not even close. Hell of a story, but not at all. Ours was an arranged situation. My mother is of some influence in politics and worked it out. We met for the first time at a ball and danced. A few months later, we were to be bonded, but...
Not what you wanted?
No. As the black sheep of the family, I just couldn't help but mess up everyone's hard work. Met Dag and told the family I'd decided to sign on with him. They were all livid, of course.
Still, seems unfair of her to go so far just to get back at you for chasing a life you can enjoy.
Oddly enough, of all the yelling voices, Falca was not one. You have to understand, for a person like her in our society, such a thing is incredibly insulting. Choosing a low station over her? Quite the attack on her pride.
Pride?
She raised her eyebrows sarcastically.
But she doesn't cut so deep. In the end, I know I chose correctly. I don't regret it. I'd rather be living the life I want and be judged by others than a life I can't stand with the approval of the judgmental. And if I can turn her attempted insult to the Nebula's benefit, then all the better.
What life were you chasing that you couldn't as her partner?
Exploration, of course. I remember seeing records and projections of all these stars and planets and people, and it was so hollow I couldn't stand it. Holograms just don't capture it, you know?
I do.
As she spoke, a humming noise came over the entire room. Everyone's attention shifted to a small stage that rose up soundlessly from the floor. Floating atop it was Daz, accompanied by a few musicians that Penn could only tell were musicians by context. The entirely robotic voice of Daz's translator came over the hall.
I've had the great pleasure of knowing many of you for some time and meeting more of you for the first time now. I've been graciously asked by the event planners to bring some music to our gathering, and I'm happy to dedicate this to all of you, my friends. I hope you enjoy.
At this, the metallic crossword puzzle on his form shifted and reorganized itself. The musicians started up an accompaniment, and Daz started to sing. Penn thought that resonance was very much the right word. Daz had no mouth or vocal cords or lungs. Instead, he seemed to vibrate and even sway. As he did, a high lulling tone reverberated throughout the hall. Second by second, more and more pitches joined the first, like a singer who layers tracks of themselves singing each part of a harmony. These parts shifted up and down and followed a pattern. Penn tilted her head. As she listened, she noted that the pattern was less like a series of notes and more like a spoken poem that circled around on itself.
And is that a poem?
Keen of you. Yes, he is reciting a poem. It's just in his own language, which most lend a very musical quality to naturally.
She looked up and saw that a number of small spaces were forming where some began to dance in their own ways. She saw Dig watching with rapt attention 3 fungi, who seemed to shift very minutely in various ways without ever moving from their position. She assumed this was some form of dance whose subtleties were lost on her, but which Dig could appreciate. As she pulled her eyes away from the strange sight, she noticed Gareth had stood.
Going to dance a bit yourself?
She asked. He turned to face her, only half a foot or so shorter than her now with her sitting.
Well, I was actually going to ask if you'd like to.
An awkward moment passed as she processed his request.
Me?
Only if you'd like to.
I don't know how to dance like a Wyland man.
Well, then it's good I know how to dance like a human. Approximately.
You?
After that little festival. I thought I might learn some human dances, and since you said you had learned some more formal moves because of the military, I started there.
All right, yeah, all right.
She took his offered hand and stood. The crowd parted for them, and they joined the others who had all silently negotiated their own spaces on the open floor. After a pause to fall into the tempo, the two started in unison, stepping away and then back together. Then they stepped together one direction and back, a twirl here spinning open and back in. At first, Penelope was just trying her best to balance pulling the classic moves from whatever vault they'd been thrown and making sure she didn't step on her duo. Gareth hoped his expression didn't betray how focused he was on each step. After some dusting off and figuring out, though, they both found a rhythm and ease that they held onto through the end. The only other two there who knew anything about human dance would have said it was rather a graceful display if they were paying much attention. The gathered aliens, with no frame of reference, simply enjoyed the display of a new culture and one that had until then not shown such a side of itself. Whispers flit through the crowd. How strange. Very movement-based, a use of those long limbs. Sweeping but precise for a form you'd think lumbering. And a call for coordination between the two. Various others remarked at the two, but Penelope's eyes found Falca, who was wearing, she guessed, whatever the opposite expression to amusement was for a Velan.
She seems to be taking exception to this.
Penelope said without losing step.
Falca.
Ah, well, she's allowed.
He looked up to Penn and smiled.